Hey guys, I'm back with more cheap JRPGs that I strongly recommend. All of the games you're about to see today are really good. The best of it all is that they're all really cheap nowadays, less than 20, the huge majority of them. Now in the last video I showed this picture with the really mainstream popular games like the Final Fantasy games, Dragon Quest, some of the Tales games, the Valkyrie Chronicles games. However, there will be a Tales game that I'll be covering today. There's a reason why, but we'll get to that later. First I want to start with a little game on the PlayStation 2 that's digitally available also on the PlayStation 4 that I showed at the beginning of the first video, but I didn't cover it. And that is Wild Arms 3. This isn't sealed, it's just in a plastic case. I don't know how much the sealed version goes for. This is a turn-based RPG with 4 different protagonists, but the story really does focus a little bit more on Virginia, the main female lead. Cel-shaded graphics, beautiful soundtrack. This is a really good game. It's not the best Wild Arms game out there. Unfortunately, the best ones are the most expensive. But this is still strongly recommended because it's really good. It still holds up, the Wild West feeling very well. The story is phenomenal. The characters are great, very well developed. The battle system is awesome. One thing that I do want to say is that the game didn't age marvelously like a lot of early PlayStation 2 games. However, if you really can't deal with the PlayStation 2 original version, go with the digital PS4 release, which is also usually on sale or dirt cheap for less than 10 bucks. This PS2 physical release, however, usually goes for 20 to 25. I wouldn't recommend paying more than 20 because it's still showing up for 20 on pricecharting.com, but 25 is a good price if it's in mint condition at the very least. That's what I will recommend. Next up is a game that I can't seem to shut up about in my videos. I always recommend this game, and one of the reasons I often recommend it is because it's always dirt cheap, like $10, man, and that is Arc the Lad Twilight of the Spirits, another game that's also on the PlayStation 4 digitally, and that version looks beautiful, looks a little bit better than this one, and it's usually 5 to 10 bucks. But the physical version, in case you want to collect it, it's usually around $10 to $15. Don't pay more than $15 for this game. This is a marvelous strategy RPG in the Arc the Lad series, a abandoned, forgotten, hidden gem nowadays series. But this one, despite being the 4th title in the series, it's not really connected that much to the other games. And it acts a little bit of a prequel, but there's barely anything from the first 3 Arc the Lad games in this one. This is completely standalone. You can start with this one and it's the best in the series in my opinion. However, this is not your average, grid-based tactical RPG. In here, characters have a limited amount of area to move around. You gotta move them to position them towards their enemies, and they all have a range, to attack or to defend and whatnot. It's a phenomenal game, one of the best stories ever written in a PlayStation 2 video game. Strongly recommended this game, guys. This is dirt cheap, $10 for one of the best RPGs in the PS2. Yeah, check it out if you can. And now that Star Ocean is trending, I did say at the beginning I wouldn't include some of the really popular games, but you need to know that since Star Ocean is kind of popular nowadays, some of the games in this series are dirt cheap. Till the End of Time, which is the 3rd game in the series, is a phenomenal game as well. And this is a game that is a little bit hard to get into because of its controls and because of its battle mechanics, but trust me, put up with that. Try to learn the mechanics and how to control the characters as best as you can, and you'll have a blast with this game. The story is completely worth it. One of the best stories and cast of characters in the entire series. No, you don't need to play a single other Star Ocean game. Remember, they all take place in the same universe, but they're all standalone, they're not really that connected story-wise or characters-wise. This version that I'm holding right now with the cardboard box is a little bit more expensive than usual. I think it's mint condition, and it usually goes for like 25 to 30. The regular version that comes inside its cardboard box, it usually goes for like $15 to $20. In Europe, I think it's even cheaper. Like the previous games that I mentioned are cheaper in Europe, I know that for a fact. Maybe Wild Arms is still the same price, Wild Arms 3 is still the same price as in North America, but all of these games that I've shown so far are both cheap in Europe and North America. One game that I want to cover next is not for everybody because, it's kind of dumb, silly, comedic, with some fan service and, that type of game, but this is a really well done and unique strategy RPG. This is Lapucell Tactics on the PlayStation 2. Now, this version might already be kind of obsolete to play because the game was recently remastered on the Switch, and the Switch version comes with Rhapsody, a musical adventure on the PlayStation 1. Both games together on this Switch version have a physical release, and that's the version to go, but obviously, since it came out this year, that particular version is still on the $50 to $70 range. So if you can't wait and want to get your hands on Lapucell Tactics and play it right now without having to pay that much for it, you can't go wrong with the PlayStation 2 version. And the best of it all is that the remaster of this particular version is not that great, doesn't look that great, and it's based on the PSP version that stayed in Japan. That's right, the Lapucell Tactics Ragnarok version on the PSP. So you'd be playing a slightly different version if you go for the Switch version. The original vanilla version, the PlayStation 2, is still greatly recommended. This is a really unique strategy RPG, a silly story, about a church organization that fights demons and all that jazz. And the main character is funny as hell, Pierre. She's really funny, she's really lovable, and the battle system, well, I say it's unique because it's hard to explain. It plays on grids like many other strategy RPGs, and once you make contact with an enemy, you go into a 2D battle screen. But it plays a lot with the elements, kind of like in Disgaea, where you need to direct the elements around and move certain things in the grid-based map to affect an entire layer, so you can abuse the elemental strengths and weaknesses of your enemies, Plays around with that, it's pretty unique, it's pretty interesting, kind of hard to get into at the beginning, but the pacing is phenomenal because this is one of those games that start off pretty easy and then slowly starts getting more and more challenging. Lapucell Tactics, strongly recommended even if it's the vanilla version exclusive to the PlayStation 2. Last but not least, I want to mention the Phantasy Star Universe saga. These are 4 games in the series. I don't have the 4th game because it's the most expensive of them all, and it's the worst, in my opinion. It's still a good game, but it's expensive, so it can't be here. So Phantasy Star Universe, the first one, also came out on the 360, and my god, both versions in both North America and Europe are laughable prices, man. They go for like $10 or even less. Don't pay more than $10 for either version. It's a great game. It's not the best Phantasy Star game, but I really am a fan of the Universe saga, precisely because there are 4 games in this series, and it's a pretty interesting storyline, to be honest. And they're all connected, and yes, you need to start with the first one. However, the second one, I have a bit of a bad news. In the North American release of the second game, which is this one, Vision of the Illuminus, it's very expensive and kind of rare here in North America, but in Europe you can find this game easily for between $10 and $15, and it's very worth it. So, lucky for you Europeans, but my fellow North Americans, yes, this is expensive. And it usually goes for like $50 to $60 already. Yikes. There's also a 360 version of this one, but it's digital only, and that might be, if you have a 360, that might be the best one, the best way to play this game for cheap. And lastly, Phantasy Star Portable is game number 3 in the series. You do kind of need to play the first 2 to understand this one, because, there's a lot of storyline issues that, carry over from this one, and characters and all that jazz, but, it's also a little bit standalone, and this is the only PSP game in the list, because the majority of PSP JRPGs that I own in my collection have gone up in price like crazy, and this is the only one left in my collection that's actually kind of cheap. You will find this for $20 to $25, I believe. I wouldn't suggest paying more than $30, but $30 is still worth it because this is one of the best. I think this is the best in the entire tetralogy, for so to say, at least in terms of gameplay. So there you go. Moving on to the PlayStation 3, just real quick, I've covered this game to death. This is Distortion: The Last Hope. It's also on the 360, and both versions are extremely cheap, $10, don't pay more than $10 for any of these games, and they're very worth it because this is among the best stories in the series, and it's one of my personal favorites. Just wanted to point that out. Let's move on to other less popular and mainstream games, and this is Disgaea 4. Disgaea 4 is my favorite in the series, and I didn't show it in the first video, I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't want to cause confusion between this one and the definitive version, which is on the PlayStation 4 and the Switch. Obviously the Switch version is expensive, so it doesn't belong in this video. The PS4 version, I think it goes for around $30, so it's not that expensive yet. But the vanilla version, the one that I played, and the one that I fell in love with, you can't go wrong. It's also on the Vita, and the Vita version is also kind of cheap, actually. $30 around that, but the PlayStation 3 version on anywhere in this planet, you can find this version for $10 miserable dollars, so if you want to collect the PlayStation 3 version of this game, don't worry, you can find it almost anywhere for laughable prices. You don't need to play the other Disgaea games to understand this one. They all take place in the same universe, sure, and the first 2 games are kinda connected, but 3 is completely standalone, this one is completely standalone, 5 is completely standalone, which is on the PlayStation 4, and it's also very cheap, by the way, actually, but I haven't finished that game. This one I never beat it, I never beat the final boss, you know, it's extremely hard, it's a Disgaea game, very, very grinding, the kings of grinding, you know, Disgaea 4, check it out. Really, really good game and one of the best in the series. And lastly, for the PlayStation 3, I want to talk about the Tales game that I mentioned at the beginning. However, this is a game that I wanted to make an exception for this one because the version that I own, it's a limited edition with a soundtrack and a little bit of an art book in there. And this version, this limited edition, because there's a collector's edition which is a huge box, very expensive and rare. This one isn't that rare and it's also really cheap. This version with the soundtrack and the art book and whatnot, usually goes for like $30, you know, $30 to $35, you know, so for a special edition, that's a really cheap price. And of course, you know, the regular standard edition goes for like $15, and this is a masterpiece. One of my favorite Tales games in the series, amazing game, amazing cast of characters, 2 dual protagonists, you know, Mila, I'm a big fan of Mila Maxwell, great game. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said about the sequel. It's a phenomenal game as well, but and it's even better in my opinion, but the regular version went up in price. It won't come down from $30, but $30 is still a really good price for Tales of Exilia 2, you know, so it's not cheap, but it's worth it. The cheap one is this one, and even the special edition, if you are lucky enough to find it for $30 or less, pick it up. And I know most of you don't give a rat's ass about the Xbox 360, but I want to recommend the 360's masterpiece, which in Europe goes for laughable prices. Here in North America, I've seen it already for 20 to 25. It's still a really good and solid price for the masterpiece that is Lost Odyssey. I won't get a lot into this game because I've covered this game to death, just like Tales of Exilia. Badass story, badass gameplay, badass music, music by Nobuo Uematsu, story by Hironobu Sakaguchi right after he left Square Enix. You probably already know there is everything to know about this game, so if you have a 360, pick it up, or if you have an Xbox One, you can also pick it up. This is 4 discs, by the way, and yeah, it's still dirt cheap, mint condition, complete in box. So 360 people or Xbox players out there, or owners, Lost Odyssey is a must play. Alright everybody, moving on to the next pile of games. The only Switch game that I have for today, because I don't have a lot of Switch games in my collection. I know there's gotta be a bunch of RPGs out there which are actually kind of cheap, but for a Switch game you gotta understand Nintendo is more expensive, so $30 is what I consider cheap for a Nintendo game, or in this case for a Switch game. So the only one that I have for today is Dragon Marked for Death. Developed by Inti Creates, the developers of the Mega Man Zero games, those games on the Nintendo DS. So this is a 2D action RPG, fast-paced, really cool. Obviously, you know, this is one of those games where if you pick one character, it's kind of like the easy mode, and then another one is kind of like the balance mode, and then another one is kind of like the hard mode. You get the idea. It's a quest-driven RPG, there is a storyline unique to each character, but the majority of the game you'll be just picking on quests and doing different things, you know, from finding items, or defeating a boss, or completing certain things in certain maps in like 30 minutes or 40 minutes. The game usually gives you more than enough time to complete, so don't be stressed out because of the time limit. But this is a hard game. The more you progress, the harder it gets, so keep that in mind. So the only physical version of this game is the Switch version, and nowadays it sells between $25 and $30. So yeah, this is the time to pick this version up, because I can guarantee it will go up in price pretty soon. So yeah, the only Switch version of today, guys. Yeah, Dragon Marked for Death, amazing game. Now moving on finally to the PlayStation 4. We're gonna start with a game that is also on the Switch, but the Switch version is the expensive version, you already know that, even though it's the complete version with all the DLCs and whatnot. But God Wars on the PlayStation 4 and actually also on the PlayStation Vita, and actually the PS Vita is also kind of cheap. You can find the Vita version for $20 to $25, so there you go, a Vita game that's kind of cheap. Oh yeah. But, you know, you can't go wrong with the PlayStation 4 version, which usually goes for $10 to $15 nowadays. This is a grid-based strategy RPG taking place in the feudal Japan, and it's very about that, and there's a lot of fan service as well, a lot of sexualization, you know, but it's funny for the most part, and it's enjoyable. Anyway, but the gameplay is a little bit reminiscent, to Tactics Ogre or Final Fantasy Tactics, a little bit like that, because, you know, there's a job system and you can change your character's jobs and all that jazz. But they will always, unlike in Tactics Ogre, you know, in those games, your characters will always have the same main job. You can just equip sub-jobs, which makes it more interesting in my opinion, being not really the biggest fan of Tactics Ogre or Final Fantasy Tactics. God Wars Future Past, every version recommended, but if you're aiming for the Switch version, I think it goes for like $30 to $40, so it's not that expensive yet. Moving on to one game that I didn't want to include here. I didn't include in the first video because I thought it was just way too popular. After all, it sold over 1 million copies. But just real quick, this is another game that I'm a massive fan of and that I know I covered to death in this channel. This is Code Vein. I'm just here to remind you that both the PS4 and Xbox One version, both in Europe and North America, goes for $10 nowadays. Maybe you'll see it on Amazon for a little bit more than that, but I'm pretty sure a lot of your local retro stores must have it for $10 to $15, and it's very worth picking up. Yes, I know it's the biggest irony of my gaming career because I don't like one bit the Souls series, and this one has a Souls type of combat and difficulty, but at least this game gave me great story, gothic setting, you know, post-apocalyptic stuff, the things that I usually love in video games, you know, and, well, a lot of fan service. Anyway, let's move on. Yeah, let's move on to another Bandai Namco game that I didn't cover in the first video. I covered the third game because it's also on the Switch. But this is not on the Switch, it's on the Vita. However, the Vita version is digital only in North America, but it did get a physical release in Europe. I don't know much about that version. The one that I recommend is the PlayStation 4 version. This is God Eater 2. As you can see right here, it's telling you that God Eater Resurrection, which is the remake of the first game that came out on the PSP many years ago, is included. But to get that version, you need to use this code. Yeah, so that means if you're gonna buy this game used, it may or may not be used already. Good luck with that. But don't worry, because the digital version of that game, which never got a physical release outside of Japan, is usually dirt cheap on the PlayStation Store. And you should buy it nonetheless, because unlike God Eater 3, which is kinda standalone, God Eater 2 is a direct sequel of Resurrection. So you do need to play Resurrection first. Actually, I started with God Eater 2, and about 5 hours in, I felt like I was getting spoiled, so I immediately restarted, you know, Resurrection, and later I got into God Eater 2, and I understood everything. So it is strongly recommended to play the first one first. It's not the best out of the 3 games, but the second one is worth the journey of the first one. And you know, the gameplay, you know, it's like Monster Hunter, a little bit like that, but with a strong story, focusing character development. So it's very worth playing because of that. You fight a lot of monsters, elite monsters all the time, and it's a treat, you know. It's a button masher, it is, but it's a treat. And if you like these types of games, God Eater is a blast because the story and characters and fan service are phenomenal. Now, moving on to a game that this particular version, this is Oninaki on the PS4, this particular version got the Agarest War treatment. The Agarest, Record of Agarest War, are a bunch of strategy RPG games that came out on the PS3 and 360, but you know, Europe got the PS3 versions and North America got the Xbox 360 versions. I don't know why. So with Oninaki, you know, he got a similar treatment. You know, we got in North America the Switch version, while Europe got the PS4 version. I'm not sure if there's a Switch version over there as well, but I don't know about that. The Switch version, unfortunately, yes, it's expensive. But the PS4 version, you can buy it online. I'm not sure how much it goes for on Amazon, but you know, I got this game. My sister got it for me when she was in the UK. She lives there. She went to a pawn shop and we bought this for £8, which is the equivalent nowadays of $10. So Europeans, you're in luck if you see this game, pick it up because it's an amazing action RPG, really dark story, strong character development. This is one of the best modern stories ever written in JRPGs, in my opinion, of course. Tragic and dark, like I mentioned, and with great gameplay, enjoyable. There's an easy, normal, and hard mode, so don't worry, you know, you'll be safe no matter which difficulty you play in. So Oninaki, great game. So sorry, North Americans, you know, you're gonna have to import this game if you want the PlayStation 4 version. But if you want a Switch version, yeah, just consult that with your wallet. Now, there's a controversial game right here, but it's also like Tales of Exilia. Both the standard and special edition version that I'm holding right here are dirt cheap, and this is a game that I strongly recommend because of its story. It's a Valkyria game, but it's the black sheep in the family. This is Valkyrie Revolution, got a lot of trash because of its gameplay mechanics, because it's highly unbalanced. For the majority of the game it's extremely easy, and plus it's an action RPG, it's no longer a strategy RPG, but it's called Revolution, not Chronicles, you know, so it's a spin-off. It doesn't take place in the same universe apparently as the main series, so you can just start with this game, just don't expect it to be as wholesome and as strategic as the other games. So this is Valkyrie Revolution, amazing game, one of the best stories, just like Oninaki, it's one of the best modern stories in my opinion, about revenge. It's kind of edgy, political, you know, very well written, very emotional. Music by Yasunori Mitsuda, man, this is great. And as you can see, this is the Vanargand edition, special edition that comes with a pin and a soundtrack with from Yasunori Mitsuda, and this version right here is $15. $15, man. And the standard edition, $10 or even less. Yeah, this is strongly recommended. Don't listen to the critics, listen to me because I'm always right, and pick this one up. And the last RPG that I want to talk about is the best in the entire video, which is why I saved it for last. I also showed a little bit of an image in the previous video. I don't know why I didn't cover it there, what an idiot. But this is .hack GU, the trilogy. Well, there's an extra episode here, volume 4. Yes, these were released separately as volume 1, 2, and 3, separately on the PlayStation 2, but because, well, it's the same game cut into 3 parts, you know. They released the first 4 games of the other saga, the regular .hack series, which is the expensive one nowadays that hasn't been remastered. So they kind of wanted to do the same with this one. Instead of releasing a PlayStation 2 game with 3 discs, they just released separately everything. You know, Bandai Namco, you know, that's how they do business sometimes. Well, they came up with this remaster a few years ago, and my god, this is a masterpiece of a game, one of my favorite all-time action RPGs. And, well, it's good news for you, okay? Yes, this is a great story, you do need to play the first one to understand everything else, so start with this game. It's okay, it's dirt cheap, it's $10 nowadays, it went down in price considerably because it also got a Switch version this year. Physical too, by the way, in case you're interested, but right now, as of the making of this video, the Switch version goes for like $50 to $60, so yeah, it doesn't belong in this video. You cannot go wrong with the PS4 version. This is the version to go for nowadays, but in case you're interested, I have a surprise for you. The entire trilogy on the PS3, came down in price considerably because of the remasters. Now that we got 2 versions that a lot of people will be buying and looking for, yeah, the interest kind of waned in the PlayStation 2 versions, but that's okay because if you are a PS2 collector like me, you're in luck, and all 3 are on the $25 to $30 range. So yeah, for PS2 RPGs that are amazing and strongly recommended, pick these 3 up if you don't have a PS4, or if you already have a PS4 and want to collect the PS2 versions. Yeah, you're in luck, my man. Those are today's recommendations for cheap JRPGs that I strongly recommend. And that's all for today, guys. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends. See you next time!